Hey everyone, it's Drayton from Scale Trains, and I'm excited to announce that the all-new Rivet Counter HO Scale EMD SD7s and 9s are in stock now at scaletrains.com. These are the production samples with all of the great railroad, road number, and era-specific lighting and sound. We're going to go over those unique features as well as the history and point out some of the unique details among each road name and paint scheme. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. EMD's SD7 and 9 diesel locomotive revolutionized the railroad industry in the 1950s. They were EMD's first hood unit 6-axle design that was mass produced, and it turned out to be a huge hit with the Class 1 railroads. It used EMD's 567 non-turbocharged prime mover to deliver 1,500 horsepower on the SD7s and 1,750 horsepower on the later SD9s. These locomotives went through a variety of changes through their production cycle, but they're best known for being produced from the early 1950s to the end of the 1950s, before EMD got into the supercharged locomotive game. Actually, better way to put it is the turbocharged locomotive game. And so we're going to kind of go through the chronology of these locomotives. We're going to start with the SD7s first and work our way to the more modern versions. So on my far left, the first road name that we're going to talk about is Union Pacific. Union Pacific had a modest fleet of SD7s. They didn't order a whole lot of these units. I think they only had about 10. And what made Union Pacific unique is that they were set up to run long hood forward, which kind of goes back to the tradition of the transition era. Locomotives were set up long hood forward for safety reasons primarily, because train crews were nervous about, not having that big steam locomotive boiler out in front of them. And on the F units, which those were the locomotives that really took the industry by storm in the 1940s and through the early 1950s, the train crew was a lot closer to the front pilot of the locomotive than what they would have been on a steam locomotive. So in the early days of the SD7 and 9 project, they ran long hood forward, most railroads did. Same thing with the GP7 and GP9. It goes back to that railroad tradition, like I said, of the steam locomotive boiler being out front, and Union Pacific's locomotives were no exception to that. They came with a Mars light, signal light on top for when they were operating in remote areas, and as well as a red emergency light. Union Pacific units also had a winterization hatch, and UP was unique in the fact that they had the extended exhaust stacks. They're the only railroad in this run that had the extended exhaust stacks. So that really stands out among the other road names. That's the first thing that your eye really goes to. Union Pacific also had some unique sun awnings on the cabs of their locomotives. They used this style through the 50s and early 60s. The GP30s that we offered in our recent runs of HO scale GP30s had the same kind of sun awning. It's neat to see it in HO scale. I'm not aware of it having been done before in HO scale. So that's what the Rivet Counter brand is all about, delivering that railroad, road number, and era-specific detail. Union Pacifics also feature 2 re-rail frogs on the trucks. So they're both on the engineer's side, running long hood forward, so be on this side of the locomotive. And those are unique among this series of road names that we're offering here. So that's Union Pacific in a nutshell. They had a lot more SD9s than they did have SD7s, but we try to offer as many eras as possible to our customers because we know not everyone models the same thing. And what's cool about this run too is if you model multiple railroads, you're not going to break the bank, so to speak, because we're not offering road names all from one decade. It's spread out among 4 different decades. Actually, 5 different decades if you think about it. So moving along to the next road name, we've got Great Northern in that stunning Empire Builder orange and the green. It's more of an olive green, and I'm sorry, Great Northern fans, I'm not I'm not well versed in my Great Northern paint colors, so don't crucify me in the comments, but to me, that nice olive looking green, Great Northern along the long hood. Of course, you've got your winterization hatch. One of the things I wanted to mention, one of the key spotting features between the SD7s and the SD9s are the class lights. On an SD7, the easiest way to tell the difference between an SD7 and 9, the class lights are centered on the SD7s, whereas on the SD9s, they're more off to the side and kind of convex instead of concave. That's the easiest way to tell the difference. The other way to tell the difference, in most cases, not in every case, but in most cases, are the handrail stanchions. On the earlier SD7 models, you'll notice that the handrail stanchions are EMD's earlier pipe style, and then the later units have the channel style handrail. So Great Northern, this being a locomotive that was in the 1950s, as delivered, has the pipe style, which is pretty cool. So Great Northern also has a unique re-rail frog. Unlike Union Pacific, which has two, Great Northern has one re-rail frog of a different style right below the engineer's seat on the cab. So that's a neat feature. And also Great Northern had a bell. These were non-dynamic brake units. Great Northern's bell was mounted to the center of where the dynamic brake hatch would be in the middle of the exhaust. Neat looking bell mount there for that particular locomotive. Moving on to the CB&Q. This particular paint scheme really stands out to me. I love the black and the Everywhere West slogan. They were one of the railroads that really kind of was ahead of the curve on their marketing, and they found a way to promote their passenger trains even on freight locomotives. And this particular SD7 was equipped with a steam generator. So these units were also used in passenger service, again set up to run long hood forward. You've got your light package here, and of course your winterization hatch, and the steam generator is located inside the high short hood. Now for us younger guys who aren't as familiar with these locomotives, the steam generator unit allowed them to heat passenger cars in the wintertime, because back in the steam locomotive era, they just used steam heat from the boiler of the locomotive. And on diesel locomotives, you didn't have that. So in the hood of the locomotive, the short hood of the locomotive, they had a boiler. They would heat water, and that's how they would heat the passenger cars. And these locomotives were used in commuter service in the Chicago area and on the racetrack. And man, it just must have been an amazing thing to hear this SD7 running along at 70 plus miles an hour, that non-turbocharged 567 prime mover. And the light package really stood out, and you would need that light package on the racetrack for all of the grade crossings that you have there running from Chicago west. So, and they stayed true to their slogan. They really were everywhere west. Now, the last SD7 in this series of locomotives is the Southern Pacific SD7R. Now, this is a 1980s locomotive, and I initially, when I was laying out this table, had the Southern Pacific next to the Norfolk Southern units because they are both rebuilds, although one is an SD7 and one is an SD9 rebuild. And what's interesting about the rebuilds is that Southern Pacific had them changed over to operate short hood forward for better visibility. And I guess that superstition of being too close to the front of the locomotive in the event of a head-on collision faded away at that point in time in railroad history. And for those unfamiliar, our resident Southern Pacific expert, Paul Ellis, has a phenomenal time to model article about the SD7R program, how it came to be, all of the different upgrades they did to the locomotive. So I'm not going to even attempt to try to tell you all the ins and outs of that program, but I will point out some key spotting features. Locomotive number 1530, this was one of the longest operating SD7 series locomotives in North America. This particular unit left Southern Pacific's roster and joined the Portland and Western Railroad's roster, a Genesee and Wyoming company. I actually got to see this locomotive. It was renumbered 1501 when it was still in service in 2021. And 1530 was its original Southern Pacific number. The key spotting feature on these locomotives is the small extended hump behind the cab of the locomotive. That's an extended electrical cabinet. Southern Pacific rewired these locomotives in the 80s, the early 80s, to make them much more easier to maintain. And as a result of that, the electrical cabinet was raised, and it's the only railroad in this series that has that raised electrical cabinet. Something that has evaded Southern Pacific modelers for decades. If you wanted something like that, you had to do it yourself with a piece of styrene and some great modeling skills. But thankfully, right out of the box, you can have that thanks to our Rivet Counter series. Of course, Southern Pacific having gyro lights on both ends of the locomotive, the Leslie air horn on top of the cab, and you know, that iconic bloody nose scheme. Just an incredible locomotive. And on most of the road numbers in this run, there is only a single fuel tank as opposed to the dual fuel tanks that you see here on all the other road names. Southern Pacific primarily used these locomotives in yard and branch line service, so they didn't need as much fuel or ballast to weigh them down as they were, you know, out pulling heavy trains on the road, because they spent most of their time in yard or local service. Another thing that's kind of neat is on the Southern Pacific, they have your standard SD7 and 9 fans, but on this particular road number, there is a unique replacement fan on the very end of the long hood, so that's kind of neat to see as well. Now, we're getting into our SD9 series locomotives. The next road name we're going to talk about is Conrail. Conrail inherited a ton of these locomotives from the Pennsylvania Railroad, and they got repainted pretty quickly into the Conrail era, the late 70s, early 80s. A lot of these locomotives got repainted. They didn't last as long on Conrail. I think by the mid 80s, most of the SD7s and 9s were retired or sold off. And the Conrail version is more Spartan in appearance than the other road names. Not as many unique features, because Pennsylvania Railroad ordered their locomotives to be rather, you know, just standard out of the factory from EMD. One of the things to note about the Conrail units is that they have dynamic brakes. And then you've got your Leslie horn mounted just past the cab, and then your Sinclair antenna on the high short hood here. So, but the thing about Conrail, of course, you know, that iconic blue paint scheme of the 1970s and 80s and 90s. It's a scheme that really stood out in a dark era of railroading, and they sound phenomenal. These locomotives sound phenomenal and look phenomenal. So even on the simplest of paint schemes, they're just incredible performers. Now, moving on to our most modern road name, and a personal favorite road name of mine, is Norfolk Southern's SD9 M's. So Norfolk Southern inherited a fleet of SD9s from Southern Railway and Nickel Plate Road. N&W did not have SD7s or 9s, but they did have Jeeps. But the ones that they did have came from the Nickel Plate Road merger in 1964. These locomotives were rebuilt by Norfolk Southern in the late 80s, and they were completely rewired, just like the Southern Pacific locomotives were. They basically wanted to extend the lives of these older units another 20 years, and they did just that. And the cool thing about these particular units is that they featured the barricade striping, is sometimes what it's referred to, or the striped pilots. That was kind of a Southern Railway tradition, and really in the Norfolk Southern era, these were the only locomotives that got that, as well as switchers, yard units. A lot of yard units got those. But these particular units were used in mass in hump yards and places like that where they needed high traction at low speeds, and that's what they got out of these SD7s and 9s. On these units, you've got your all-weather window, and as I mentioned before, Southern Pacific, they changed the direction from long hood forward to short hood forward. These units are short hood forward. On Road number 53, the bell is actually mounted to the fuel tank. On this particular road number, the bell is on the high short hood. You've got your firecracker antenna, your big Norfolk Southern Thoroughbred logo, and what's kind of neat is this particular version is for you mid to late 90s modelers because they feature ditch lights. Ditch lights were mandated by the FRA in 1997, and so Norfolk Southern added ditch lights on both ends of the locomotives. They flash when the horn is blown. And Norfolk Southern's fleet of SD9s, they lasted until the late 2000s. I believe the last two were retired and removed from the roster in 2010. A lot of these units ended up getting second lives on short line operators and I believe a grain elevator out in California. So if you're a short line guy and you want a fun weekend renumbering or relettering project, the Norfolk Southern version is a great one to do that with, and it'll fit into the modern era because of the ditch lights. So all in all, you've got about 50 years of railroad road number and era specific variations from the 1950s all the way up to 2010. Just an incredible variety here, and kudos to the product development team for the incredible amount of research that it took to deliver these road names, and they just do fantastic work. And like I said, the sound is off the charts. Just stellar performing locomotives, and you will definitely want to add them to your roster because inventory will go quickly. These, we always order extras if you miss the pre-order deadline, but inventory is limited on some of these road names. So highly recommend clicking the link in the video description to place your order today. And we appreciate you tuning in here on the Scale Trains YouTube channel. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the thumbs up button, ring that bell to get notifications the next time we upload a video just like this. And I hope you guys have just as much fun as I'm gonna have running my SD9s this weekend. Thanks for tuning in, everybody.